You'd think that space, value and sheer capability would be priorities for MPV buyers. The sales figures might suggest otherwise, but if these remain key criteria in your search for a truly practical 7-seat people carrier, then it's well worth considering this one, Ssang Yong's Turismo. It's certainly not a conventional choice, and it comes from a Korean maker that may be unfamiliar. Still, in terms of sense and sensibility in this segment, there's not a lot to touch it.
Looking for a properly sized people carrier? Here's one you probably haven't considered, Ssang Yong's Turismo. Searching for a car of this kind can be a frustrating process. Let's assume that quite reasonably you want a 7-seat MPV that can actually seat 7 people, not 5 adults and 2 midgets at the very back. So a Grand Scenic size compact model won't suit. And that just as reasonably you want those 7 folk to be able to bring a decent amount of luggage with them. So a Ford Galaxy or a Volkswagen Charan still won't be quite big enough. You'll need a diesel engine to keep running costs down and a reasonably sized one so that there's plenty of pulling power when heavily laden or when towing. You want a proper car, not a van with seats and windows, and you'll need to keep within a realistic family or business budget, say up to £25,000. It's a perfectly reasonable set of requirements, but only one model can meet them, this one. For SsangYong, being able to achieve all of this with one product is nothing new. In 2004, the brand introduced the Rodius, a huge people carrier built on a 1990s Mercedes E-Class platform that shared its chassis with a luxury saloon called the Chairman that the company had made for its home South Korean market. A Rodius could tick all the buying boxes I've just listed, which ought to have made it a huge worldwide hit. Which it might have been, but for ungainly styling, which continued to prove a sales impediment, even when SsangYong replaced the car's thirsty old 5-cylinder Mercedes diesel engine for its own far more efficient 4-cylinder unit in 2012. Cue the £100 million investment that has bought us the Rodius, as it always ought to have been, with a new name, the Turismo, and smart, sensible styling now clothing that hugely practical 2-2-3 7-seater cabin layout. Thanks to the restyle, dealers will now find it much easier to get potential customers behind the wheel to experience SsangYong's more efficient eXDI diesel engine. Once there, sales folk will be able to point out to them not only all of the space and value boxes this car can tick, but also the fact that almost uniquely this MPV can be ordered with high and low ratio 4-wheel drive, opening up people carrier ownership to buyers who previously, in the search for a 7-seater tow car, would have had to put up with a clunky large SUV. On paper, it all adds up to the best value, the most capable and the most practical 7-seat MPV on the market. But what's it like in reality? Let's find out. Unlike many similarly sized super large MPVs, this one's been developed from the beginning as a car rather than a van, an approach you might expect to pay dividends when it comes to the road-going experience. Now, to some extent that's the case. Vans tend to be developed with very firm rides to suit the loads they will have to carry, a trait which then tends to be passed over to the MPV variants developed from them. This SsangYong, in contrast, wafts you about in pillowy ride comfort that'll be welcomed by long journeying folk you have to carry. What they won't welcome is any temptation on your part to throw this Turismo through the corners. As you might expect, it doesn't really take kindly to that, floating about on its springs with plenty of body lean through the bends. Grip levels are reasonable, but the steering is quite light, which takes a bit of getting used to. Motive power comes from a tried and tested source, namely SsangYong's own 2-litre turbocharged eXDI 200 diesel engine. This offers an acceptable level of performance and refinement given its modest capacity. With a maximum power of 155 PS and maximum torque of 360 Newton meters at between 1500 and 2800 RPM, the engine's optimised for low-end pulling power whatever the conditions, hence the hefty maximum brake trailer towing weight of 2,500 kilograms. Now naturally, with 155 PS, powering a vehicle weighing just over 2 tonnes before you start packing it with people, you're not going to win too many traffic light Grand Prix. But the torque at hand means that the Turismo will rarely struggle, even when fully loaded. If you're used to reasonably sized MPVs, you shouldn't struggle to thread it through the urban jungle either, and styling that at last disguises the enormous bulk doesn't now put you off from trying in the first place. The boxy shape with its large glass area helps, as do the rear parking sensors that are standard on all but the entry-level variant. Around town you may have to work a little at the 6-speed manual transmission. One reason why, if I were fronting up my own money, I'd probably opt for the smooth shifting 5-speed T-tronic Mercedes-Benz automatic gearbox that I'm using here. In the case of the mid-range ES Turismo model that most people will buy, it distributes its drive rearwards, but in the case of the top flagship EX model that I'm testing, power can, if required, go both front and rearwards. For yes, this is that rarest of things, a four-wheel drive people carrier. In fact, it's rarer than that, given the provision of the kind of low-ratio gearbox you'd normally only find on a heavy-duty SUV. This is the first people carrier I can think of that's ever been equipped with such a thing, and it ought to make this vehicle extremely attractive to those who need to transport up to 7 people, whilst towing and or negotiating difficult conditions. How difficult? Well, I wouldn't take one of these to the Serengeti. Approach, departure and ramp angles are all below 20 degrees. But having said that, the ground clearance you get, that's 175mm at the front and 195mm at the rear, is as much, if not more, than you get with some RAV4 style soft roaders. Now, there are probably larger cars than this one currently on sale in the UK market, but just offhand for the moment I can't think of one. A Turismo is a lofty 1.85 metres high, occupies a vast 2 metres of width and dwarfs a Range Rover by measuring well over 5 metres from end to end, including a central 3-metre wheelbase section bigger than the total length of something like a Toyota IQ. So it's big, very, which was also true of this car's direct predecessor, the Rodius, but that was a car that neither disguised its bulk nor made any attempt to smarten it. This model, in contrast, exercises the cleverness of the modern stylist's pen, so its size looks manageable for a trip into the urban jungle, even if the tape measure suggests it to be just as huge as before. To be honest, I always quite liked the Rodius. It was different, which I found refreshing, and never pretended to be anything it wasn't. Such a pity then that it was so odd to look at, especially from behind. All SsangYong had to do was to clothe all of that practicality in a more universally acceptable shape, and they'd have a potentially strong seller, which, as I've been saying, is exactly what's happened here. Styling still won't attract many to this car, but crucially, it'll no longer be a sales impediment in the way it was before, with the hexagonal shaped radiator grille and trapezoidal bumper, both neat touches. Further back, past the exaggerated wheel arches, and you come upon this solid C-pillar that successfully covers the more extreme aspects of the old Rodius's original glassy structure. The tailgate's smart too, almost Ford Galaxy-like, with its angular rear lamps and boomerang-shaped reflectors. But of course, what matters is what lies within. We could talk millimetres of headroom, wheelbase and such like, but in order to really get a handle on the size of the Turismo body, consider this. In some world markets, the original version of the Rodius that this car's based upon was sold as an 11-seater, and the design we have here is no smaller. Therefore, when you only try to accommodate 7 people here in a layout that sees 2 at the front, 2 individual chairs in the middle and 3 on a bench at the very back, you have a fairly unconfined amount of breathing space. This helps solve that problem inherent in most 7-seat MPV style vehicles of having no luggage room available when all the seats are in use. In fact, there's more space in the back of the Turismo when all the seats are in place than you get if, in the same configuration, you combined the luggage capacities of a Ford Galaxy, a Vauxhall Zafira Tourer and a Seat Alhambra. Now, the volume in question amounts to 875 litres, though to be fair, that applies only if the third row bench is pushed forward as far as it will go. Now, both second and third row seats, you see, can be slid backwards and forwards on recessed floor rails to prioritise other people or packages. If you need more luggage space, then you can fold the backrest of the third row forward onto its base. Unfortunately, unlike more modern MPVs, the seats in this one don't fold flat into the floor. Or if you're feeling especially strong, have an extra pair of hands to help and have garage storage, you can remove said bench completely. Given the hassle involved, you'll probably only want to do this if you absolutely have to use the middle seats and haven't released enough space by simply pushing them forward a bit. Now, if these central two captain's chairs aren't needed by people and you're in a removal van frame of mind, it'll be much easier to simply fold them in half too. They don't fold into the floor either. In which case, the amount of space available really does conform to removal van standards, 3,146 litres in total. This may be a fraction less than a Chrysler Grand Voyager, but it's still vastly more than most families will ever need. To put this Turismo's interior size into perspective, a huge Land Rover Discovery has just 2,558 litres, and neither the Chrysler or the Disco can match this SsangYong's premier party trick of being able to fold both its second and third row seating flat to make a pair of double beds. This Turismo is certainly no camper van, but that's a useful feature even so. So much for baggage space. What about room for people? Well, open one of the huge doors and the first thing that you might have to get used to is the slightly strange cabin layout. Most people carriers have room for 3 in the middle and then 2 extra chairs at the very back, but here it's the other way around. Now you can see SsangYong's logic here. If you're setting out to get to the third row, there's room between these 2 individual middle chairs to walk through to the very back, rather than having to contort the middle seat with wheels and levers, folding it out of the way, as is the MPV norm. On the other hand, it does mean that a family like mine that has 3 kids will have to travel with one of them separated and relegated to the very rearmost seat. It's a good arrangement for keeping fractious children apart, but such enforced separation may also lead to tantrums if your brood is of the particularly unruly sort. It may be better then, when travelling 5 up, to get all 3 of your rearward passengers seated here on the third row bench, where there'll be proper adult style first class 747 levels of legroom, even if the middle 2 chairs are pulled right backwards and folded in half for the backseat trio to use as picnic tables. Then everyone's happy. Well, almost everyone. The middle row occupant will be placed on a foam-filled pad rather than a proper recessed seat base. They'll also have to do without the twin cup holders thoughtfully provided for those on their left and their right. As a result, they may well feel that they've drawn the short straw. There are no such issues if you've wangled yourself a seat in the second row on one of the sliding and reclining captain's chairs that I mentioned earlier, each one equipped with an integral armrest and enough legroom to remind you that this cabin works off the same kind of wheelbase size as a Mercedes S-Class limousine. Here there are also picnic trays that fold out of the seat backs in front of you. And up front, Well, here the changes over the old Rodius model are relatively minor. So this Turismo shares its predecessor's unusual central instrument cluster, dash-mounted gear shift, an array of warning lights in front of the vast four-spoke leather-trimmed steering wheel. As for practicalities, well, though it's true that some smaller rivals do offer more cabin storage space, there's still plenty of it, with large door bins, a cubby under the front central armrest, and enough cup holders for the Real Madrid trophy room. SsangYong reckons that this is the best value 7-seat MPV on the market, and as we're going to see, it's pretty hard to argue with them on that point. First though, to the Turismo model lineup. Every variant uses the same 155 PS version of the company's EXDI 200 diesel engine, and prices start from around £18,000 for the entry-level S variant. Most customers though will probably want to find the extra £2,000 necessary to upgrade to leather-lined ES spec, at which point there's the £1,500 option of a Mercedes-sourced 5-speed auto gearbox. You must have auto transmission on your Turismo if you want 4-wheel drive, and top-of-the-range EX spec, which means a necessary £24,000 asking price. Now to that value pledge. The only way you could get yourself a brand new 7-seat people carrier for less than £18,000, and it wouldn't be much less, would be to get yourself a feebly powered version of a small van-derived MPV, say a Citroën Berlingo Multispace, a Ford Grand Tourneo Connect or a Fiat Doblo, with extra third-row seating in the luggage compartment that you'll find won't be large enough for normal-sized adults. The third-row chairs that you'll find in a purpose-designed 7-seat compact-sized MPV, say a Ford Grand C-Max or a Peugeot 5008, aren't much roomier, and prices for diesel models here start at around £21,000 or closer to £25,000 if you want an engine with the same kind of pulling power you'd find in this Turismo. Go for something very slightly bigger, say a Ford S-Max or a Vauxhall Zafira Tourer, and if you want a diesel, you're looking at list pricing in the £23,000 to £25,000 bracket depending on spec. But even then, you're talking in terms of luggage and people capacity way off that of this SsangYong. Conventional full-sized MPVs like Ford's Galaxy and the Volkswagen Charan Seat Alhambra clones, priced in the £25,000 to £30,000 bracket, can't match this either. With all the seats in use, the luggage capacity in each case is less than half that of a Turismo. But we really need to be comparing apples with apples here. In other words, pitching this SsangYong against MPVs that, like this one, can properly take 7 people and all their luggage without resorting to things like roof boxes and trailers. Now, options here are far more limited and are mostly based around large vans with seats. More sophisticated models like the Volkswagen Caravelle or the Mercedes V-Class seat only 7 and are up in the £25,000 to £40,000 bracket. But as SsangYong points out, this Turismo isn't just a big van with seats bolted in, it's a proper purpose-designed car. There used to be a number of big MPV products like this, Kia Sedona and Renault's Grand Espace for example, but now it's very different. Today, the only real alternative that conforms to this concept, the only other product that delivers precisely the same thing, is Chrysler's aging Grand Voyager, automatic only, in which guise it's priced from well over £28,000 or over £32,000 if you want to match the leather-lined spec of a comparable Turismo ES Auto variant that would cost you less than £22,000. I should also point out that Chrysler don't offer the option of 4-wheel drive. In fact, no other large people carrier under £35,000 does. So you get the idea. From a price versus practicality standpoint, this car delivers on its promises and does so while building in an impressive 5-year limitless warranty and a value-laden standard spec. You'll search in vain for a trip computer on any of the models, which is rather curious, but that aside, you won't have to resort to a lengthy options list to get yourself a decently specified car. To that end, all variants feature front fog lights, power heated mirrors, roof rails, an alarm immobiliser, air conditioning with an air quality control system, a leather covered steering wheel and gear knob, Bluetooth connectivity, seat back tables for second row seating, and a 6-speaker CD stereo with remote steering wheel controls, plus USB, iPod and aux-in points.
On a car this large, rear parking sensors and a full-size spare wheel are, I think, pretty important, and you do get them in the mid-spec ES model most will choose, as well as alloy wheels, privacy glass and leather seats that are heated up front and, for the driver, power adjustable.
That leaves only the top EX four-wheel drive variant that I've been trying here, which, amongst other things, adds solar controlled glass and rain-sensitive wipers. A popular option across the range is the upgraded Kenwood stereo system, or, as here, the Kenwood touchscreen sat-nav setup. And safety? Well, the Turismo doesn't have a Euro NCAP safety rating, and on the base version, side airbags are lacking, though you'll get these further up the range. Otherwise, though, there's little evidence of SsangYong stinting in this area, with twin front and side airbags included, plus Isofix child seat fastenings in the second row, and all the electronic assistance you'd expect from a modern MPV. Things like ESP stability control, ARP active rollover protection, and a BAS brake assist system to help the standard ABS brakes in a panic stop. Passive safety is further increased thanks to 2 high-strength subframes fitted to the front and rear of the car. These help to disperse any impact shocks from a frontal or offset collision and protect passengers by minimising cabin distortion. Good to know. An MPV this large is never going to be massively cheap to run, which is why no brand in this segment offers petrol power anymore. For SsangYong, efficiency took a big step forward in 2012 when the old 5-cylinder Mercedes-sourced 2.7-litre diesel used by this model's Rodius predecessor was replaced by the company's own, far more modern Euro 5 compliant 4-cylinder 2-litre unit. True, the South Korean brand still has a little way to go in this respect. Fuel and CO2 returns are quite a way off those of, say, a Ford Galaxy or a Volkswagen Charan. But then those people carriers aren't really big enough to compete with this one. Pitch a Turismo against MPVs that are, and you'll find its figures right on the pace. And what are they? Well, in a manual Turismo, expect 37.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 199 grams per kilometre of CO2. Which means that in rough terms, you're looking at running costs that are pretty much the same as those you'd get from comparable but less powerful high-end i800 and Volkswagen Caravelle models. That'll give you a long operating range from the 80-litre tank. If you're looking at an automatic version of this car, those returns are inevitably affected, but not significantly. Combined cycle fuel economy is 36.2 miles to the gallon and CO2 emissions fall to 205 grams per kilometre. That's still marginally better than a comparable Chrysler Grand Voyager. If you go for the top automatic four-wheel drive version that I'm trying here, the figures are 34.9 miles to the gallon and 212 grams per kilometre. What else? Insurance is Group 27 or Group 29 for the four-wheel drive model, and all variants get SsangYong's impressively complete, class-leading 5-year limitless mileage warranty. Limitless meaning the lack of the kind of irritating maximum mileage condition that many other brands impose in their small print. Crucially, for many potential business customers, this package is valid for taxi use. Now, as you'd expect, the SsangYong Limitless cover deals with all the major mechanical components, including wheel bearings, suspension joints and bushes, steering joints, shock absorbers, and even the audio system. Wearable components, such as clutch discs and brake friction materials that could have their life reduced by poor driving, are covered for 1 year or 12,000 miles, while the battery and the paintwork are covered for 3 years. What it all boils down to is this: where else can you buy a huge 7-seat vehicle with four-wheel drive if you want it, generous amounts of kit, nearly 1,000 litres of luggage space when all 7 seats are in place, and still get change, potentially lots of change, from £25,000? Nowhere. In fact, you could pay more than that for a little diesel Honda Civic. So, this Turismo wins in terms of practicality per pound, but then so did its Rodius predecessor. That car, though, was difficult to countenance. It's difficult enough for badge-obsessed British buyers to get their heads round choosing a relatively unknown brand without also throwing willfully curious styling into the mix. But things have changed. First, SsangYong is a lot better known these days, thanks to the growing success of its SUVs. And second, reborn as the Turismo, this design has been visually rehabilitated into the kind of car you'd simply think was large, practical, and maybe even passably smart. All of which means that Korea's oldest and most experienced car maker can start again in this segment in its quest to find big families and private hire people prepared to look beyond the obvious choices in their search for super spacious 7-seat practicality. If you're a customer of this kind, it's worth taking a look at the Turismo. In many ways, there's really nothing quite like it.